Sir Raleigh in the house. Woo, 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 woo. The dog.
Hey, Bubba, what are you doing there?
Hey, bud.
In there.
How's he going back there?
He's just holding court, guarding the front yard.
What does he freak out about the most? Squirrels? Is it?
Oh God, dude, don't get me started.
It's the
Like
squirrels.
squirrels now. I'll take him to one of the dog parks nearby, and he has now a 3-tree perimeter that he is just locked in on. And the other day, he actually almost caught one. One was trying to go from one tree to the other, and he had him locked in. But the squirrel basically did like zigzags on him,
Oh,
and kind of juked him out a little bit. He kicked up a lot of dirt, but I'll be honest, he gets so locked in the squirrel sometimes that he doesn't want to leave the dog park, and I literally have to pick him up
oh my
and
God.
take him out. So we got to
How
work
did
on that a little bit.
how did you come up with the name Raleigh?
There's just a name that Shannon always wanted. She thought it was a really great dog name, and when we adopted him, yeah,
Was
so
it
it's
Mojo?
Raleigh, like RAW. Everyone always asks whether it's like the city, but it's
Mm-hmm.
RAWLEY. So I just thought it was a cool name.
You know the question I would ask that
What's that?
if he was named after Mojo Raleigh.
Oh, that's right.
The height
That's
bros.
funny. That's
Oh,
funny.
I gotta let you know before we start talking some lightning. Somebody told me to tell you to say hi today. Do you know who it is?
Don't know.
So a person told me to tell you to say hi, and that one person's name is the great Joe Madden. Joe
Oh,
Madden.
really?
Yeah. Joe
You had Joe
Madden's.
on?
Yeah. So I was, I had Joe on for 12:05. So I was going through my whole spiel, the first 5 minutes of the show of everything I was doing and all the things. And Joe goes, "My God, Jay, you got a lot going on today." He's like, "I'm impressed with all these things that you're doing." He goes, "Make sure you tell Eddie Encina I said hello." I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome, man."
That's awesome. Joe, I learned a lot from Joe. I've learned, that was my first time covering Major League Baseball regularly at the Tribune, and I was pretty green in terms of that, not really knowing exactly what, um, you know, how much of a bear that was and how much of a
Right.
grind it was. And obviously, I had to go against Mark Topkin every day, so that was a treat. Um, but yeah, but I learned so much from Joe. I mean, the great thing about baseball is how, this is how entrenched you are in the sport every day,
Right.
and how much you really get to know those guys, the players, the managers, the coaches, the staff, everyone. And Joe, I think I've told you the story before. Like, I remember 2006, his first year there, and like, they had Greg Norton hitting cleanup, and Casey Fossen was their number 3 starter, and you were like, but Joe was always the most positive dude in the room, being like, "We're going to turn this around. We're going to turn this around." And I was one that was like, "How? Like, how do you turn this?
Mm-hmm.
How do you turn this around?" But yeah, him and Buck Showalter are probably in my career have been two of the guys who I really learned the most from, and and the fun of covering baseball really is dictated by the guy who's in the manager's office a lot. Like, if you have a manager who really doesn't get what the media is doing, or isn't open with the reporters that are there every day, it can be tough. But I was really lucky enough that the two teams that I really covered had really great guys, and Joe was one of them. And there was no doubt, in my mind that Joe would be successful. And it's just, when you had that 2016, there was 107 loss team or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You knew he had a long, it was a long path, right? And what they did in 2008 was amazing. And then, after that, but Joe is one of the great guys of the game. Like, and even when I was covering in Baltimore, I would see him at the winter meetings all the time, and we'd catch up and everything like that. So that's cool. That's cool to hear.
What's the biggest difference between covering baseball and hockey, and the biggest similarity?
Well, you know what? I honestly think that COVID did a lot to every beat. Like, no
Right.
matter what you do, because everyone kind of, you were able to survive without the in-person interaction. And I think hockey got back to it kind of late. Was probably one of the last ones to get back to it. So, um, you know, I think, like I think that the dudes in hockey are great dudes. Like they're
Right.
but there is a culture thing to hockey that like you do keep stuff in house a lot, in the room a lot.
Mhm.
In baseball, if you're around enough, like there's really no secrets. You can find out everything, and you can find out, everyone's at everyone's at their stall. You can talk to one guy, and also there's just more casual conversation. I feel like in
Mhm.
baseball, just because you were in the room so much more and you're there every day. And that's not to say that there's not that in hockey, but I just think there's more availability for it. Like there's a, distinct time when guys are in the room and guys aren't, and sometimes certain guys aren't in the room or they're first, they'll jet out to the,
Right.
there's the dressing room, what we call, and then there's the real dressing room, which is like where the guys go when they change out of their gear and actually go to hang out or go to, get dressed. And so, there's not really that in baseball, I don't think. There is that in football, but there's not really there's a places to quote unquote escape the media, but
Right.
I think in baseball there's a lot less, and just being around those guys every day. The season's so long. The spring training's a great thing too because like there's a natural progression to the season where it's new. You're kind of away from the city. Everyone's kind of much more low key in spring training. Whereas you really don't have that. Like it's not that natural thing of like a relocation kind of thing in hockey.
Right.
The preseason's much shorter, stuff like that, where all of a sudden the season's like they're like bang, and then guys are a little bit different when the season starts versus the preseason or spring training or whatever. Like especially in hockey, like those guys are focused on every game, every day. Routine's a big deal. It's a big deal for every athlete, but I think in hockey, the routine and even some of the superstition stuff like that comes into play is really really a big part too. But
Yeah. What's the biggest thing you could take away from the exit interviews now that it's about a week and a half since we were there and we spoke to a bunch of different guys and Julian and Cooper spoke as well. What was kind of one of the big things that really stood out to you about that whole exit interview day?
yeah, I mean, first off, I was actually surprised at how forthcoming a lot of guys were, about the season and where they're at. I think that what Andrei Vasilevsky and Nikita Kucherov told us was probably the most like outgoing, engaged that we've seen them all year, maybe, or
Right.
even since media day, maybe. And that's good to see. I think that it's 2 days after they get eliminated, right? So it's still fresh, it still stings and everything like that. I do think that sometimes fans and even some of us in the media kind of think to ourselves like have been a little bit spoiled to a certain extent, that
Right.
It's hard winning a playoff series, right? It's really hard to do, and it's something that you do have to have bounces, you have to be healthy and everything like that. But the one thing that actually kind of stuck out with me is like I actually kind of wonder if like just listening to when Brandon Hagel talked, I wrote beat com about it on Sunday, was just kind of like, and we had I think you were around, like we had requested Hagel many times after throughout the series, and I think after a game between games 1 and 2, that was the only time we really got him was at the end, and obviously he was dealing concussion and everything like that, but hearing him talk about the Ekblad hit and what it meant, and like the way he broke it down, I thought was crossed over the cultural aspect of what hockey is and what the playoffs are and everything like that, but also that like the fact, especially the fact that like no one's really going out there to purposely hurt guys and stuff like that, but at the same time, like there's a respect that guys have for one another, and for one another's careers, and but to purposely go for a guy's head is out of bounds. And just watching Hagel talk, I mean, I thought in retrospect he looked a little groggy still and was still dealing with some of that.
I gotta be honest. I gotta be honest with you, man. I was, because I know some of the people in the room were saying it was refreshing. He was so honest and open. I've had 4 concussions. I've had 2 of them playing hockey. I don't want to say incredibly uncomfortable. I could have gone without having him speak because I didn't feel like he was 100%. And for a guy that's spoken a lot about mental health, we know his past with his
Yeah, for
family
sure.
members. Like, it's hard not to think that, Ed, right? Because we hear these professional athletes and we know what CTE is. And I just, there was just something about that I could have done without, obviously the content we got and to be able to disseminate that and, to have the conversation about Ekblad and the hit. And I had people from Toronto reaching out to me going, did he reach out to him? Because we just asked Ekblad and he wouldn't confirm or deny that. It just, again, I understand we need to hear from the guy, but if they would have told me, if they would have told us, hey, Hagel's not talking, I don't know if any of us would have been like, I think we would have understood. Is that right? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
if
no,
they would have,
I totally
you know
agree.
what I mean?
When I put together the like the request on players, Hagel was the last one, and I said if he's okay,
Yeah.
like, and I'm not behind the room to know what procedure
Right.
they went through to kind of okay him to talk or anything like that. I honestly didn't expect him.
Right.
I like I said, I requested him. We had requested him over the course of, especially going into, going between game 3 and game 4, because you did want to hear him, talk about, coming back from the suspension and everything.
Right.
But yeah, I honestly, there's the things that you've got to ask for. There's the things that you expect, right? And to be honest, I didn't expect to see Brandon Hagel, and I think I talked to Eric about this. It's like, we probably didn't expect to talk to him till training camp, again, after he took that hit. But, again, like, I don't know the procedure. And like I said, listening to him talk and, just the kind of the look on his face and stuff like that, it was a little, but at the same time, like, I don't think anything that he said wasn't what he would have said.
Right. Yeah.
Normally.
No, I'm with you. And he's kind of a melancholy guy anyway.
Right.
He's got a little 1996 Raven, to him where he's, you know what I mean? He's that kind of guy. He's not he's not like, bouncing around and you know what I mean? It's just, that's not his style. I got to ask you about Julian Brisebois and the whole deal with Isaac Howard, because, we spoke about it here on the podcast for a while. And again, for the people that were like, I can't believe you guys are bringing this up. Julian brought this up. He brought this up at the fireside chat, and he got all of us walking out of there going, oh, crap, like this guy could be on the team this year. That's where we all walked out feeling. And then now we're at the point of he's not going to play for the Lightning. And I asked him, I said, are you surprised? And he goes, yeah, I am. And I wonder, Ed, like, yeah, again, Julian has done such a phenomenal job. He's one of the best GMs in sports. But you wonder the lack of the bedside manner when it came to the Steven Stamkos situation, when he didn't even approach him 2 off seasons ago. And now this whole thing where it looked like it was going in a direction of he was going to be on the team. Like, if everything was on the up and up, like, let's say nothing was said, right? And the way that the roster was trickling down at the end of the season with some of the injuries, like, it would have just been an easy in the last couple of games, like, right, Isaac Howard stepping right in, just like we saw with Ryan Leonard, just like we saw with some of these other guys. And I don't think anybody would have batted an eye. They would have just thought, like, that's the natural progression. One of the best players in college. Lightning have a need because of some injuries. Boom, boom, boom. I didn't think there was much to do about anything here. I wonder if Julian, I don't want to say like he needs to be held to the fire here. Definitely not calling for his job, but I mean, he's got to wear some of these too, right? Like, he doesn't get carte blanche for like nothing he does is wrong, because I feel like he mishandled this situation, and it's not the first time that something like this has happened. And it's, he's got to look himself in the mirror and be like, hey, am I doing something wrong? Because, I've, as well as he's done, Tanner Jeannot, Connor Sheary, the Stamkos situation, he's had some missteps here the last couple of years, and I don't think it's unfair to bring that up, because I'm not saying that the guy sucks and we should get rid of him, but you got to call a spade a spade. If you're going to give him his flowers when he does things well, you got to say the same thing when he's not doing well as well.
Yeah, so I think, there's probably a little bit 2 things there, right? So, I mean, there's the trades, right, which are when we talk about Jeannot, and, Jeannot, they basically, they gave away 5 draft picks, including the first rounder that's this year.
Mm-hmm.
And we're able to get a second rounder back in trading him. So basically what you got net wise on that is pretty remarkable. Remarkably bad, obviously.
Yeah.
The Connor Sheary deal obviously hasn't worked out. And especially given the commitment that, I mean, I think it's more the commitment years wise, because he's got another year under his deal.
Yeah.
It doesn't really look like, he's probably pretty low on the list, even though he played well in Syracuse, that he would be a guy that they'd really count on in 2025. So yes, there is that. I mean, the one thing and we go back to like the whole stuff about how everything's kept so much in house in hockey, and It's so covert and everything like that. Is maybe covert's the wrong word to use there, but I do. There is some concern in my eyes about the way the Stamkos thing, just specifically the Stamkos thing, worked out, and how there did seem to be a communication gap between management and the player and his representative.
Yeah, because it's one thing if you don't want to bring him back, right? Like you don't bring him back, fine. You don't want to bring him back, but the fact you don't even talk to the guy, it's like, oh, geez.
Right. And that no doubt wore on that team last year. There's without a doubt, like, and that's why sometimes, like in these settings, I do wish, to be honest, that we were able to talk to Julian a little bit more. Like I do think they have a very rigid schedule on him. It's, beginning of the year, it's, at that fireside chat in the middle of the season, and it's, it's at the end of the season. I mean, like, for someone who's as forward facing as he is, and the most forward-facing decision maker in terms of hockey operations, you really kind of want to have his voice a little bit more, and I've probably talked to him more, on the side than most people have, because I'm with the team more and stuff like that. But he is not one to give up anything,
right?
Plays
it very close to the vest.
And I think that's the same way that he works deals too. I mean, like, I think it became very clear that with the Stamkos situation that, they thought, they wanted to keep him. They thought he was a certain value. They weren't going to budge from that, and that's what it was. Now, what I don't understand, what I don't know about the Isaac Howard situation, is how much similar that is, in the sense of, did they at some point make it clear to Isaac that, listen, either A, this is a salary cap situation, we're not going to be able to have you play an NHL roster this season, or that we have a process here that everyone goes to Syracuse at least for a little bit, and you work your way up, and it's you earn your way up to the NHL team no matter who you are. That's the thing that I don't know.
It's got to be the latter, though, right? I mean, because like, I'm sorry to cut you off, because the more
that this thing is played out, I feel like it's the latter. But what both sides have said don't necessarily point to that, right? I mean, like, what Isaac says maybe points to that, but the fact what Julian says about how Isaac wanted, basically wants to test free agency, how did we get to that point, right? Because the thing was, I guess the point, I go back to the fact of, like, the past couple trade deadlines, this was the guy that you couldn't touch, right? I mean, this was the guy that they didn't want to move, so they had, from the organization's perspective, they had a future in mind for him. Like, you don't go and watch a player play 4 times in his college season like Julian did, or have JP Cote invest in him the way that the organization did. Make sure that he's under, and so that's where I think that, how did the communication fail there? There's a lot to this that I don't think any of us truly know yet about what truly happened here. But I do think that the rigidness as to the way that Julian operates, to a certain degree, of his communication of, we will talk to you, I mean, but even then, when we asked back in what was it, January, right, when we talked to him, his answer was still, let this play out, let's not put too much on him right now, let him play out his season, and then we'll work it from there, right? So is that what he was telling Isaac? I mean, is that like, every time that he went to Michigan State to talk to him, said, don't worry about anything, we'll figure it out later. And then they come to and Isaac sees Ryan Leonard in DC, he sees, other guys, everywhere else, and he's like, okay, like, why wouldn't I be there? And then all of a sudden it's a shock. Now, having said that, he's been in this developmental system for a while in terms of being at dev camps and stuff like that. Like, I would think that he would have a little bit of an idea that, like, the way they operate. And obviously he's Isaac Howard. He just won the Hobie Baker. I would think that few people would probably say that he couldn't add something to the Lightning right now.
No doubt.
But yeah, I think there's just more to it. And the unfortunate part is like, I hope we can get to the bottom of it before it happens. But like at this point, like it seems like the ship has sailed on him ever playing in a Lightning uniform, unless something dramatic, changes, like which I don't think happens at this point. I think the Lightning have gone to the point now where they're like, what can we get for him? I think it's moved on from, will he ever play here, to what can we get for him? But to answer your question, yeah, I do think, I mean, we all know Julian and the way he operates and the way that he talks and the kind of the discussion of how he evaluates things and how he communicates. And I can see there being a communication gap there that was created very quickly, much similar to the Stamkos one, which I think actually kind of was more stewed over time.
Right.
Like, it was one that, from the get-go, Steven made it clear through us, I want to sign an extension, and he made it clear through us when he came back from the summer.
Right.
I'm not happy because I didn't get an extension, or they didn't even talk to me. Right. So that all played out like pretty visibly. This one hasn't, because I don't think anyone's really been able to get Isaac and say, hey, what's your side of the story beyond, Spit and Chicklets kind of, letting him say something, a canned quote of what he wanted to say for,
right.
30 seconds and then moving on. I've tried to do that. And to be honest, there's been very little headway on trying to get Isaac to kind of tell his side of the story as well.
Oh, so you've been trying to hear from him, huh?
Yeah, well, I'm going too much into it. But
yeah, no, that's fine. You got to do what you got to do, bro. This is your job for sure. What do we know now as far as when people can see this team? Because now we're the big announcement earlier today. No more FanDuel to go on Scripps, and we've seen Scripps, down in South Florida with the Panthers, and this is kind of that next step. And I was worried about Randorf and Engblom and Gabby. It looks like those that group is staying on, which is I think is a positive for everybody. But what do you know about how people are going to be able to consume the Bolts next year?
Yeah. So first off, I have a story online now, which
nice. Okay.
So basically on TampaBay.com, which basically outlines everything you need to know. Hopefully that answers a lot of people's questions, because I've been covering this thing for years. Ever since the turnover from Fox Sports to Bally, the bankruptcy, and the loss of a lot of the the accessibility on cable providers and streamers and stuff like that. So I think first off, when you mentioned the talent of the TV broadcast. This has nothing to do with anything like that. You know what I mean? They're very pleased with the TV product as it exists. They're a top 10 rated, TV market in terms of viewership. We all kind of know that, and they love everything that Gabby and Brian and Dave all bring onto that broadcast. So it's not as about that. It's more about accessibility of getting that broadcast into more people, under more people's eyes and into more homes. And obviously, we're not getting too much into like the TV terms here. Basically, 30 years ago when Sunshine Sports came on and signed the Lightning, 33 years ago for their inaugural season, everything was about cable TV. It was about regional sports networks, all this other stuff, right? Now that's changed, because of the accessibility, cord cutting, people, jumping off cable, whatever it is, now it's about, getting that viewership. And obviously over the past few years with Bally and the uncertainty of Bally turning into FanDuel, Diamond Sports, the ownership of all that group when they went bankrupt, when they filed for Chapter 11, there was a major, level of uncertainty. So a couple of years ago, the Lightning approached Scripps, and they had just, basically, I think they had just, so we're talking about 2023, they had just launched basically over the air system with Vegas. And then with Phoenix, later Utah. And so we're talking about big, huge, like in terms of network region and network market,
right? Yeah,
huge markets, right, in the West Coast. So, and their business model was obviously over the air, which is kind of a blast of the past a little bit. Is I don't know the last time anyone's ever thought of a TV antenna to a certain extent, but basically,
right.
These TV, like back when I was growing up, we had the rabbit ears and we were trying to get the UHF stations and everything like that. Now, any TV has an analog function that you can slap on a $30 antenna to to plug it in your, the back of the TV and slap it on your wall or your window or something like that and get all those stations. We haven't thought about this in years probably, but that's what it is, right? And so basically, the fact that Scripps owns a few stations in this market, obviously they own Channel 28, the ABC affiliate. They also own what is currently a Ion station. It's Channel 66. And what they're going to do is they're going to rebrand that and call it the Spot Tampa Bay. And all of the Lightning games are going to be broadcast on that station. So conceivably, you can get every Lightning game, every locally produced Lightning game for free. And obviously, you got to do the analog thing, you got to do the over-the-air thing. Now, because it's being rebranded, they have to go through the whole process Scripps does to kind of get it back on providers. So, what you see on right now, if you look up Channel 66, the Ion station, that doesn't mean you're going to get it. But the past relationships that they've had with Vegas and Florida and Utah, those things have worked out for the most part. Good. The streamers are a little bit tough, but they've been able to get on a lot of the cable and satellite providers. So you should be able to get that station within time by the beginning of the season.
So hopefully if you have Spectrum, Frontier, and stuff like that. Right.
I wouldn't be concerned about Spectrum. Like, it would be more Frontier, Verizon. I think that's in some areas of Pinellas County. But the streamers have like YouTube TVs and Hulu's. That's been a little bit of a challenge. So that's something to watch out for. But again, and then the other aspect of this is the direct to sorry, Mike.
No, you're good.
Yeah, but there's the direct to consumer element here, which basically, much like the FanDuel app and the Bally app before it, basically you can pay a certain price and get all those games streamed. You can do it through Roku and Chromecast and Fire Stick and everything like that. So, and that there hasn't been a price point announced that I've been told that's going to be kept to less than $1 a game. So when you think about that, 82 games, playoffs, 89 games, first round of playoffs, even if they throw in some preseason games, that's still a lot less than what you're playing on FanDuel for $19.99 a month. But again, that's more of an option too for people who don't want to do option A or option B, or if you have, I have YouTube TV. If I love YouTube TV so much that like I'm not going to go to someplace else to get it, and they don't have it on, that I can do the direct to consumer thing. But honestly, the main thing here is to get expand the reach, expand the accessibility of the broadcasts. I think one thing that's really interesting is this is seeming to be the new wave. Obviously Florida did it last year. Utah and Vegas have done it in the past, and in the past 2-3 years. And another thing is because Scripps owns so many stations and they have a lot of relationships with other stations that are looking for programming, the Lightning's viewership market extends from just north of Fort Myers all the way up to the northern Florida border when it becomes Nashville's market, and like Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi are all national market, but it's a huge market. So if you can get that programming on some of these other stations, like in Orlando Scripps market or Jacksonville or Pensacola, places like that, you can be offering games in places that really haven't watched Lightning games, and then that's a way to even further expand your fan base. So that's kind of still in the works in a lot of ways, because you're dealing with programming and different stations and stuff like that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see that in the next few days. It's almost kind of like I was actually talking to the president of Scripps Sports yesterday and kind of comparing it to back in the day when everyone was Atlanta Braves fans in the South because
TBS Superstation.
We all watched TBS, right? Or there were tons of people all over the country that were Cubs fans because
WGN,
right? Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, there's the availability to kind of get back to that. It's a different model and it's a little bit of different market share and stuff like that. But when you look at Vegas, for example, like Vegas has their games broadcast on stations in Montana. So like their market is that big.
That's good.
And obviously Utah moving from Phoenix to Salt Lake has kind of changed that a little bit, but imagine that. I mean, like a team that's 5 years old, basically, or whatever how old it is, or 7 years old, and you can get their games, expanding their fan base in almost on the Canadian border. So this is kind of the wave of the future, and it is really a great thing. Like, no joke, it's a great thing on two ways. One, hopefully, it's alleviates all the questions of like FanDuel and all the trouble that's been in financially, and
Right.
whether it was going to survive, how long it was going to survive for, the contract statuses of all the teams with the network and everything like that. But two, I do think it's a very good step forward for them to be able to expand the brand on a station that will be heavily accessible to, one, locally, the fans in the Tampa Bay area, but also abroad, and the other thing too is the station also allows them to put on some of their own programming, like the block party and
Recharge and stuff like that.
recharge and Bolts Beginnings and stuff like that, which I know is something that has been a little bit landlocked a little bit. You can only kind of see it on the website or on YouTube or something like that. Now you're gonna have and you can see it on FanDuel, but now you have a broader reach of it too. So I know it's something that's been in the process for a couple years at least, and finally we're kind of seeing it. I think I know that there was an out in that contract with FanDuel that they were able to exercise, and they were able to do that. So that's why now versus last year or anything like that. So, but I think it's a good thing. It's just like anything else that's different. I think the fans are gonna have to be educated on it a little bit. Like when I started tweeting about it, my mentions blew up and people really didn't understand it. But I'm telling you, if you read the story on TampaBay.com, I think I handle most of it in terms of what you need to know.
There you go. There's the link, TampaBay.com/sports/lightning all day. You can go in the chat here and click on the link. Of course, you got to subscribe. But if you're paying attention to the show, hopefully you already subscribed to the Tampa Bay Times. Before I let you go, buddy, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about the whole Pete Rose thing, because I know covering baseball for so long, kind of crazy how it happened yesterday, where it's kind of a weird vibe for me, because I feel like the dude was, obviously he did wrong. But for many, many years, it was like, all right, just can we just get this done before he dies and just kind of move on? And now it doesn't make it. I don't think there's any closure in it now. And I said this even before they were gonna, open it back up again. I said, if you do this after the guy dies, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
It's just a weird, funky feeling for a guy that covers baseball or covered baseball for as long as he did. What is your thoughts on the entire thing?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think that it seems like it's like I don't know what it does, right?
Yeah, what does it do? Yeah,
it's it would have made more sense when he was alive, and it kind of doesn't make much sense to me right now. And then again, I mean, like, who knows whether he's going to get in still into the Hall of Fame, because the process is different after you come off the writers' ballot. You have to go through more of a committee, and who knows what those people think. I mean, I have a Hall of Fame ballot still, and I'm lucky enough to have one still. But it's tough nowadays to vote, because it's one of those things where you almost you have to kind of stick to what your initial philosophies are, but then also knowing that things change, right? And I think that's the tough part, is knowing that things change, right? I mean, like for me, I think I voted for Bonds and Clemens the last year they were on the ballot. And to me, I just thought that it was time. There's no, to me, it just seemed like it was time, and I don't think anyone ever wanted to touch Pete, because it was so far off,
right.
Like they'd already kind of sent him to another planet anyway. So why, I mean, seriously, yeah. And so why even try to bring it back? It was it was almost like that they had taken care of that, right? And until these with guys like Bonds and Clemens, it was always in the frontal lobe of what we were talking about, because they were still eligible,
Right.
But I think the way the structure is a little bit allows you to kind of kick the can on guys after they fall off the ballot, the writers' ballot, in 10 years, because the structure of the committees is one every you deal with this era the next year, and the other era this year. So but yeah, I just don't feel like it really, I don't know what the purpose of it is, to be honest, and I don't know what it really does. I mean, I think honestly Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I think it's tough having a Hall of Fame that doesn't have
the guy with the most hits of all time. Yeah.
So and I'm of the thing of guys have served their time.
Right.
I mean, Pete, I actually got Pete when I was collecting autographs and when I was younger, and I actually got Pete to sign a ball for me, and he was a
Wow.
great guy, and like
Mhm.
I know there's a lot of stories about him, but like I truly think that I know he was there making a lot of money, but like he wasn't by any means bitter or rigid or anything like that in terms of interacting with fans or anything like that. So, but yeah, like I said, like it just kind of seems a little off timed and a little like I don't want to say disingenuous, but just like the purpose for it, I'm still kind of searching for.
I'm with you. Before I let you go, man, let everybody know what you got up on TampaBay.com, Tampa Bay Times there.
Yeah, so in today's paper and online, we have something on basically taking a look at. I got a chance to catch up with Yanni Gord and just kind of what he thinks about coming back and just kind of him talking about the injury that he had late in the season or during the playoffs, what the effect that had on him. Obviously, when they got Yanni, he wasn't 100% at all. So it still took him a little bit of time coming back from that sports hernia surgery. And he said it probably took him about 3 weeks to get there. And we all know what Yanni has done for this team in the past. And then the question is now, as he's one of the unrestricted free agents of, do they bring him back? We're kind of at the whole, not to that bigger deal, but back to the whole Steven Stamkos thing again of like, what's a guy worth, to you
Right.
to stick around,
You think he comes back?
I do. I think they value him a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's just what, getting to the money. What does the money work? I think, if you sign him for, a 2.5 to 3 AAV, I think that's pretty.
It's got to make sense there because, and I think the other thing, Ed, is that you can't. I mean, one of the biggest things that not many people are talking about, like you went into week one, you went into game one of the playoffs with him on the first line, right? Like this is, and I know the injury to Oliver, and I understand that, but like he's got to be your fourth line guy. He, you know what I mean? Like he's got to be. Maybe a third, maybe, but I want him on the fourth line. Give me on the fourth line. Give me 10, 11, 12 minutes of Yanni, maybe a night. I'm fine with that. But you start getting him up in the middle six and even in the top line, even second power play unit. Like he wasn't doing that before. And now you think that that's going to help now. Like I love the guy, but it's got to make sense for all parties, right?
Well, the question there is can a guy do can he do what he does best playing that few minutes? You know what I mean?
He's gonna have to.
I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that. But we only saw really a glimpse of him kind of getting back to that kind of guy,
right?
And what he does is I think what they try to do with that first line is they tried to reinvent a little of Andre Palat with there, but it really didn't work out. But also just going back to the other stuff is also got an off-season primer, just kind of the to-do list of what's coming forth for the Lightning in the offseason. Obviously the UFAs, the unrestricted free agents, they got 4 of those guys that they've got to figure out what to do with, including Glendening, Perbix, Atkinson. I think Atkinson and Perbix are probably gone, but Glendening probably too. So, and then the restricted free agents, a couple of those guys. We talked about Isaac Howard. Do they trade him at the draft? What did they have at the draft? They did get a second round pick, but only 3 picks in the first 6 rounds. So, but do they make a big splash like they did last year at the trade and at the draft? When they traded Sergachev, I don't see that coming. But I think last year was when they made the big splash, spinning kind of Sergachev and then getting Gensel. But that, and then just looking forward into free agency too. We will continue to look more into that as it kind of approaches in July 1st in terms of because for the first time in a long time they actually do have money to spend under the cap. So they actually can go out there and get a couple guys or invest in one guy who might be able to help them. So we'll keep on having that. Like I said, have one more story about the TV stuff on Sunday, just kind of what that means. A little bit some of the stuff we're talking about here, but and then I might take a little bit of a break after that. But
good for you, man. Get a vacation, man. You deserve it, pal. You definitely deserve it. Eddie in the Yard. Make sure you follow him on Twitter/X. Subscribe to the Tampa Bay Times. I can't tell you and stress you guys that enough. Our local coverage does such a fantastic job, and especially now when we don't really know. Oh my God! Look at Raleigh.
We put him to sleep, Jay.
Raleigh. What a cute dog. All right, buddy. Give him your better half my best, and appreciate you joining me every week. this season, man. It's been a lot of fun talking hockey and wrestling and everything. So enjoy some time off, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Will do, buddy. Anytime. Talk to you later.
Thanks, pal.